it's not always easy to find the time or to use the free time that we have to sit and reflect on ourselves. And sometimes that even feels self-serving. Yet, if you don't do that, then you're not as intentionally living your life as you could be.
Coach Colleen, I know you've done other interviews with Helen Wang and Oceanside Perspective, but I'm hoping that if you wouldn't mind just starting off with a brief intro of yourself again.
Sure. Um, let's see. Well, physically, I am in the beautiful New England part of the country. I'm a strength strategist, and that's really what I love to do is help people maximize their strengths. And I do that both in sort of an executive coaching one-on-one capacity with people who work in for-profit and non-for-profit roles, as well as I also do practice my strength strategy expertise in team settings, helping individuals who work together understand each other better and work more effectively together. And I've been doing this for 23 years. And before this, I worked in the field of advertising, kind of an unconventional move from advertising to executive coaching, probably for many people anyway, in their mind. But I love it. I mean, I really have found my calling, and I really enjoy helping other people hopefully find their calling or certainly find the way to do whatever that they are doing with their time, professionally or personally, find ways to make that as meaningful and intentional and enjoyable as possible.
Absolutely. And just to give more background, what we're doing here, what Professor Helen and I are working on is really deep diving from that leading with emotional intelligence class, which you spoke with us last spring, and tailoring that to understanding the multi-generational diversity in today's workforce, where there could be, mostly four generations, boomers, Gen X, millennials, Gen Z, and really understanding how those different generations can best collaborate and unite together to really make the workplace, more efficient, productive, enjoyable, right?
Mhm.
A place where everybody isn't just, working next to each other, but really working together.
Mhm.
And so I really am looking forward to hearing about, how you have seen as you've, worked with folks and over time, how maybe different issues have changed, or really, I think something that I've been seeing is that the older generations may be given leadership tools, strengths profile to better lead and manage their workforce. But Gen Z, as they're graduating from school and entering that workforce, they've spent the majority of their time in similar peer groups as them, and maybe they don't have that same training to understand, oh, okay, this is how I can connect with my millennial, Gen X, or baby boomer boss or executive once I start working, to help me, better fit in with the workplace and be a better team member
Mhm.
in a professional setting. So I'd love to go into more depth with you of, how can graduates and young professionals be better prepared for a career, how they can
Mhm.
position themselves, and, how we can use strengths profile. So would you like to start with how strengths profile can be used as a tool to, um, enter the workforce with that first job?
Yes, sure. Yeah, there's so many different ways. So, um, I guess I'd start with saying that no matter what generation you are a part of, I feel strongly that the best thing that you can do for yourself from a um, professional development or personal development standpoint is to be deeply self-aware. And there's many different ways to do that. As one of the ways that I prefer to do that is to use the strength profile assessment, because it gives you a landing place, to begin to think about or what are the kinds of strengths that humankind, all the people around me, my work colleagues, my personal friends, what have you, what do they have, or what's sort of the dictionary from which we can um, think about ourselves and think about others, and then more specifically, all right, and what of all the strengths in the strengths profile, for example, do I own, and am I most competent in, and area, grow most quickly, and et cetera. So once one becomes deeply self-aware through tools like the strengths profile and conversations with a coach or with a professor or work colleagues or parents or what have you, that's sort of step one. But to me, the second, and I can talk more specifically about how to do this, but the second most important value that one can get from the strengths profile tool is um, an understanding, depending on how you use it, but an understanding that everyone is different.
Yes,
People are different across generations, but they're different within my generation. And the more
absolutely.
that you can be thoughtful about the differences and then approach people with that thoughtfulness and intentionality, the greater the chances are crossing generations or crossing, interests or what have you, within your own age group, the more effective you can be as a colleague and a friend and um, a brainstormer or whatever the challenges might be. And I think that's a two-step process, that it's difficult to be as conscious of the fact that other people are different than me until I first get clear on who I am. And then when I get clear on who I am, and even within that, I get clear on what's the best version of me and what's maybe the not so great version of me, which often might be related to when I overplay my strengths, which I can do so unintentionally, but it just comes really naturally to me. And once you kind of grasp that concept, then you're halfway there, at least in my mind, to recognizing that other people have the same confidence and around their strengths and the tendency perhaps to overplay their strengths and have different preferences, et cetera. And then I can adapt. I can expect that. I can adapt to that, et cetera. Anyway, I
Absolutely. And that really is the key there, is that self-awareness of understanding yourself. And then, as you just said, like maybe seeing, okay, maybe others may be overplaying some of their strengths. But still, I think that builds such connection when you can see, okay, I have this strength. Coach Colleen, you also have this strength. This is how we are similar, even though we may be different generations.
Mhm.
And that could play out on teams.
Right, right.
Is self-awareness something just that Gen Z needs to learn and work on, or is that something that's prevalent in the workplace that people are always working on self-awareness?
The latter for sure. I think people will be surprised and at how often, at least for me, I have conversations with people who are even post-retirement and are not as self-aware as they um, discover they want to be in order to be happier or more intentional or better relators to other people. Because it takes time. I mean, it takes time to take an assessment, first of all, if that's one way you're going to go about it. But it really takes time and contemplation to consider um, where do I get my energy? Where do I grow most quickly? Where can I stay really focused? What do people value that I have to offer? And how do I feel about all of that? And we get on a treadmill of activity that we try to undertake every day. And it's not always easy to find the time or to use the free time that we have to sit and reflect on ourselves. And sometimes that even feels self-serving. Yet, if you don't do that, then you're not as intentionally living your life as you could be. And you're not as strategic with your strengths, back to being my interest in being a strength
Sure.
strategist, having people be as strategic as they can with the tools that are, in their being.
And I think, so I had the opportunity to meet with some current undergraduate students at UC San Diego actually yesterday, and they shared some questions that they had about entering the workforce. And
Mm-hmm.
something you just said was hit me as something very similar to one of the questions they had, which was, I don't know necessarily what I want to do in my career. I don't have a specific position in mind that I want to do. And so how would you advise someone that's not entirely, they don't have that specific vision that, okay, I'm going to be a doctor and I know exactly the path I need to do to get there. How would you
Mhm.
advise someone that's still kind of learning what they want to do before getting on that treadmill and just going every day in corporate America?
Mhm, mhm. Great question, Natalie. Well, the first thing I would say is try really hard not to put the pressure on yourself to have to solve that, and to maybe even have the explanation for others who are asking that question, something simple you could say that helps you feel less pressured by others. Because people are well intended when they ask you, what do you want to do? Whether they are, a relative or whether they are
Sure.
a guidance counselor, they're really well intended. But how can we honestly, at age 18, 19, 20, really have had enough experience and exposure to make that big of a decision? We really can't. I mean, or if we can, hopefully, we've been guided by some good people, we have some luck, but the touch points that are fueling that decision are pretty small. So availing yourself of the opportunity to study lots of different things, meet many different people, absorb information and be thoughtful, is the number one thing I would say. And then secondly, if we go back to the strengths profile, that particular tool is one that might stimulate some thinking because the person who takes the strengths profile and has what they call the expert report. In that particular report, it offers career suggestions. So what they do is they analyze the assessment takers strength, realize most common energized strengths, and they
Mhm.
map them to people who've taken the assessment in 43 different career sectors and are able to identify for the person who has a strengths profile report 6 career sectors that are most common for people who have your realized strengths. And they do the same thing with the unrealized strengths portion of the strengths profile. What are 2 career sectors that are most common for people who have your same unrealized strengths or very similar unrealized strengths? And that's often thought provoking to people to take a look at that and say, this is interesting. I never thought about being in transportation or in logistics,
Sure.
or I've always been kind of interested in marketing. This makes me feel a little more confident that, the people who are in that, have makeup similar to me. So that's another way, I think, to help one begin to collect thoughts on what you want to do from a career standpoint. And then the third thing I would say is as you are, and as a young adult, as you're thinking about, what might I want to do, the clearer you are on what your strengths are and the better able you are to articulate those, the higher the likelihood is that conversations that you'll have with professors or alumni or family friends, or career fair individuals, the higher likelihood those conversations will be productive because you'll be able to say to the other person, I'm not quite sure what field makes sense for me, but I know that I'm really good at strategic thinking and I like to think creatively. And as a matter of fact, I'm really good about thinking ahead to what could
Mhm.
go wrong and figuring out creative solutions or whatever the combination of strengths might be that really give you energy that you could discover from your strengths profile. And it's planting those ideas with other people, the more specific, the better, that might get them thinking, that kind of person would do well in blah, blah, blah field or blah, blah, blah kind of role. So anyway, those are a few thoughts I have on help.
Absolutely. And as you said, looking at the careers that would align with those realized or unrealized strengths that are energizing would allow one, I would think, to have a better chance of being the best version of themselves every day and
Mm-hmm.
be a little bit more fulfilled by what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, now what that's making me think is that another strong benefit of self-awareness, and using something like the strengths profile is that the greater depth of self-awareness that one achieves from that self-reflection builds confidence.
Mm.
Because what your confidence is grounded in. I know that I am good at relating to people, or I'm good at building
Yes.
other people's self-esteem, or I'm good at creative problem solving. And that does 2 things. One is it makes you feel like, well, you do kind of own your own little piece of the world, or
Mhm.
the side of the classroom, or whatever it might be. This is where people can count on you, and you know that you're going to do well. But secondly, when you have that level of self-awareness and self-confidence or growing it, then it makes it easier for you to say, it's okay that I'm not good at accounting or I'm not good at, thinking innovatively or whatever it might be. Someone else can own that because I own this. So, I really love the strengths-based way of thinking. Probably mostly from the standpoint that it helps people build confidence in themselves and grounds it in something that feels as tangible as possible when you've got a kind of a list or an understanding of your strengths.
Absolutely. And so you're kind of alluding to this, but I'd love to dive in a little bit deeper of how current students that are going to be graduating very soon and entering the workforce, how they can position themselves for that role, knowing what their strengths are. And okay, maybe they have a little bit of an idea, like I want to work in the biotech industry. How could they better position themselves to successfully be hired and then successfully enter the workforce in that field?
Okay, great question. And of course, it depends on the person, but so in
Sure.
general, if we go back to the strengths profile as a tool, um, one of the ways that the strengths are explained in the expert strengths profile report is that there is a delineation or separation of the 60 strengths that are in that assessment according to strength family. So some of the strengths that we all have to do with the way we motivate ourselves. And some of our strengths are about how we think. And some of them are about how we communicate, et cetera. There's 5 different sort of groupings or families of strengths. And one of the practical ways to make good use of that is to say, all right, well, I'm going to look at my strengths profile report, and I'm specifically going to look at what are the strengths that are most energizing and where I have the greatest performance within each of these families. Sort of what's my style or flavor of communicating? What's sort of my flavor or style or inclinations in the way that I relate? And same thing with the way that I think. And the strengths profile report is rich with definitions of all 60 strengths. So one of the things that I've helped other university students do is to take a look at their report, identify their key strengths in each of these 5 different dimensions of maybe what we call one's personal brand.
Mhm.
And all right, well, how can I string together perhaps a few sentences from the definitions of my most common communicating strengths or relating strengths into a paragraph, a few sentences that describe my style of communicating and my style of thinking, and having that little exercise for yourself, take an hour or whatever and think that through, ends up hopefully with a nice page with 5 different paragraphs that is a summary of what you believe to be your greatest strengths. And having that written down legitimizes it, first of all, right? It gives you a place
Absolutely.
to start that you can tweak over time as you think about it more. But even more tangibly, it gives you something that you could use to write your summary for your LinkedIn profile. It gives you language you could use in your resume, and it gives you language to be able to answer some of the common interview questions. Oh, tell me about yourself, Natalie, or
Sure.
what are you really good at? Or Natalie, what do you think you want to do when you get into the workforce? And all of a sudden you could say, you know what? Well, I tend to think this way. My communication style is this, etc. And it even gives you something specifically you can leave behind with the person who is helping you think this through, whether this is, someone who's screening you for a job, uh,
Mhm.
whether it's, a family friend that's helping you kind of think about this. So that to me is, using the tool in that way is one of the best ways to prepare for the job search process. Yeah.
Right. And then that demonstrates with the person you're talking to your level of self-awareness of understanding yourself, projects the confidence, that presence that you have, the potential leadership skills you have, the initiative that you've taken to spend more time learning about yourself and reflecting on what it is that you want to do, that you're a driven individual that could then right away contribute to a workplace environment.
Yes. And an important piece of that, Natalie, too, is thinking, as part of this process is thinking about what are examples that illustrate these points that I'm making about my strengths. So thinking back to projects you've done, in school or in summer jobs or internships or with your family, whatever those might be. Something that you think about things you've done that have gone well and that you felt energized when you're doing them, and then go back and look at that list of strengths and say, well, what strengths was I using when I did the blah, blah, blah thing? One, so it helps to reinforce that, well, this is probably true. These are my strengths.
Mhm.
Secondly, it gives you examples so that if you are in an interview, you'll be able to say, all right, well, I'm good at A, B, C, D, and E. Example of that would be X, Y, Z. Because people will remember the stories, but you don't want them to only remember the stories. You want them really to remember what it is you were doing that underpinned your success and what strengths you were using. So then they can use their own imagination and think about, all right, this person is good at A, B, C, and D. That is the kind of person and these constraints we need for this, particular job opening or this particular career, direction that I could advise them to take. So those examples of stories are as another stage of the process, but an important stage of the process.
Definitely. So another piece of feedback that I received, I asked a dozen students to describe their generation to someone that's not part of their generation. And I got a lot of responses related to Gen Z is very in touch with their emotions. They're very emotional. Would you equate being very emotional to being highly self-aware? Or do you feel like there's still more growth to be done, even if one is in touch with their emotions, to truly understand their strengths and how that would apply to the workplace?
Um, I think emotional awareness is one step and a very important step toward um, being ready for success in the workplace. But I would encourage those Gen Z individuals who are feeling like that is enough to think more, think more deeply about that. Because certainly are some strengths that any of us have that are more emotion based, more relationship based, which might be, that we're empathetic or that we're compassionate or that we're good at identifying people have things in common and connecting them because I'm aware of other people and aware of myself. But there are also other strengths that we have that might not be as emotionally based. They're more thinking based. And I guess what I would say is if you are someone who is even enjoying the feeling that your emotional awareness is strong, then continue on that journey. And if necessary or helpful, avail yourself of a list of values or a list of strengths, which you could even pull off the internet and
Mhm.
ask yourself, well, how do I identify, with this particular list of strengths or values just to help me further dimensionalize who I am. Does that answer your question?
Definitely.
Okay.
I think that kind of translates to we asked them as well, what surprised you as you enter the workforce? And building on that, we are Gen Z sees themselves as highly emotional, in touch with their emotions, seeing how that varies across generations, as each generation kind of has a different interpretation of how emotions do or should play a role in the workplace. And I
Hmm.
think that then gets me thinking more about, okay, well, will the workplace kind of adapt to how Gen Z is, or is Gen Z going to adapt to how maybe the workplace they're entering is in terms of how much that plays a role in their day to day?
Hmm. Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I would guess that it'll be a little bit of both. I hope. I hope that the older generations, and which I'm one, are motivated and willing to recognize that different generations bring different behaviors and mindsets to the workforce, and that variety of behaviors and mindsets and strengths and capabilities are what we generally need in any workplace in order to have the breadth of skills that are needed to work well together and to produce, whatever it is that that organization is producing. So I hope that you're going to have that. And of course, in life, we're going to have some people who are more flexible, more emotionally aware, what have you, in both generations for that
Sure.
matter. Yeah, but at the same token, right, thinking about it, trying to think about it as a Gen Z individual. Um, Again, the more you can be self-aware and interested in growing and learning, hopefully, and educated, and availing yourselves with classes like Helen's, the
Mhm.
higher the likelihood is that you are going to develop into someone who has an appreciation and flexibility and adaptability to work with different generations and different types of people within your own peer group. Because we can certainly say that there are pronounced, researched differences between generations, but there are differences between me and everybody else within my own generation that
Absolutely.
the awareness and the flexibility and the adaptability is important in both ways you look at it.
I think you've said it perfectly. Thank you so much, Coach Colleen, for sharing your insights and providing a small bit of coaching to our students and our audience at Oceanside Perspective that will help them certainly as they enter the workplace. I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I'm always eager to lend my wisdom, expertise, all the things that I've been learning and growing with over the years to young people. So anytime, don't hesitate to ask me back. I'm happy to help.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Natalie. Bye.
Take care.